Good morning. That was the party last night. I sang along. Well, maybe. That's the first time I've done karaoke or been to karaoke. And one of the other clergy this morning, when I said that in the sacristy, said, "Really? You didn't even do it in Korea?" And I thought, that'd be really mean. I don't know what I did to offend that guy. Anyway. So the registration for Michael Dowd has been open for a week, and it's already over a third full. So I'm just telling you that if you want to register, you need to do that. And encourage your other friends to do that as well. And I don't know if you picked up one of the St. Paul newspapers or not, but one of the things that they're looking for during these summer months are people to volunteer to teach children during Sunday school, so it's not a long-time commitment. And if it's something that you would be interested in doing, if you see me, I'll make sure that you get connected to somebody, or Ellen, or call the church, speak to Gail, do something. So remember, no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey,
you are welcome here.
So, as you know, I decided at the first of this year to undertake trying to do spiritual teachings designed to speak to what I'm calling living in the gap between the no longer and the not yet. For years in my teaching, I have somewhat followed a roadmap, like I would do the parables of Jesus, or teach a series on something. The teachings of Jesus is found in the Gospel of Thomas. Thank you for enduring that. I learned so much. In this emphasis, unlike those two examples, I don't really have a roadmap. I'm about to begin a short tour this morning down one. I've simply been stimulated by the cliff that I walked off on when I first got exposed to Iliadelio. And consequently, I have been reading and researching in the arenas of what Darren or Mutu calls quantum theology. How does what's called the new physics apply to and affect our spirituality? And of course, Michael Dowd, whom we will spend a day and a half with in November, he writes with much enthusiasm about the benefits of embracing evolution. And you can read all about what he has to say about it in this book, Thank God for Evolution, How the Marriage of Science and Religion Will Transform Your life and our world. So in light of all of this and more, I'm wondering, what is the meaning of faith? And how can we grow in our ability both to access, be shaped by, and shape the various worlds in which we live? How can we access, be shaped by, and then shape the various worlds in which we live? Now, not every scientist agrees with what I'm about to say, but the majority do. A basic principle of quantum theory is that we bring into being the reality that we know and perceive. I think this is the most significant teaching that I have to offer at the moment. We bring into being the reality we know and perceive. This is a frightening concept for some people. It's not new. You can go back and find it in the teachings of Jesus. You can find it in the teachings of the Jewish prophets. You can find it in mystics like Meister Eckhart. They went out of favor with the so-called enlightenment. It's an interesting term. We were in the dark in so much of the enlightenment, So last week I spoke with you about how shadow aspects of our culture determine much about how we behave. And these shadow aspects operate outside of our awareness until we are able to know them and to see them. And if we don't know them and see them, they shape us. They shape our culture. They shape our institutions. And one of the shadow aspects that I mentioned last week was that of patriarchy. I want to give you an example of how patriarchy has worked. It's still one of the most powerful forces shaping our culture and our institutions. You remember that when we first started this series, I said that culture determines what is real. And the example that I used about that was Copernicus. Copernicus makes this discovery, or has this revelation, insight, that the earth is not the center of the universe, but the sun is, of the known world at that time, known universe at that time. And he made that known, and the culture, which was the church, said no. You can't say that. For one thing, it would mean we'd have to change too much stuff. So, and the church won. We didn't have the internet then, didn't have things going on then that are now. But for a long time, the church determined what was the culture. What was real, what was the meaning of reality. So, fast forward, Sigmund Freud is the one who opened the door on the ruling role the unconscious plays in our lives. And in the wake of his discoveries about the id, the ego, the superego, psychologists, sociologists, other academics began to conduct all sorts of research on we humans. Why do we do what we do? Is there such a thing as free will? If Ivan Pavlov could make dogs salivate by ringing a bell, could humans in a like manner be conditioned? And so forth and so forth and so forth. Now, most of these researchers did their experiments, they conducted their tests, they did their surveys on men. And when they announced their discoveries, they said, this is true for humans. When they did, if they did similar studies on women, they said, this is true for women. So men got to be stand-ins for the whole culture and women all by themselves. This is a deeply ingrained pattern even to the second. You ask the typical male, who are you? And the answer will be, I'm French, I'm American, I'm Texan, or whatever. But if you ask the typical female the same question, who are you? The answer will more than likely be, I'm a woman. So it was a female researcher by the name of Carol Gilligan who took issue with some of the experiments being done by the developmental psychologists. And she conducted her own set of experiments and research. She took issue especially with the work of Lawrence Kohlberg, because Kohlberg was focusing mostly on men. And she said that his research was inherently sexist, which it was. And out of this grew one of the most important contributions to the literature of human understanding ever written, and the book is In a Different Voice. Not in a better voice, not in a worse voice, but simply in a different voice. And this book, along with the others that got stirred up by the work of Carol Gilligan, initiated the second wave of feminism in the United States. The first wave of feminism would be seen in that work that resulted in the women having the right to vote, which is less than 100 years old. So Gilligan's contributions led to the passage of the Gender Equity Act in 1994, and in 1996 she was listed by Time magazine as one of the 25 most influential people in the world. So when Gilligan asked women, how do you describe yourself, she found that women defined who they are by describing relationships. Men define themselves by separation or the use of I statements. And she also found that men think in more violent terms than women. And Gilligan compares these results to childhood fairy tales, where men fantasize about slaying dragons and women fantasize about relationships. Now you notice that males, we are run, this country, by white males, right? Are still attempting to control who can and cannot vote. But that's another story for another time. As we know more, as we see more, we bring new reality into being. So last week we talked about the importance of growing in knowledge and understanding. So we are seeing more, we are knowing more, and one of the implications for this is a new understanding of what we mean by God. At least it's new to us. It was not new to our long ago ancestors who sensed the presence of God in creation and not up there. God is not an external white male with a beard off somewhere in the sky, but God is intimately bound up in and to be found in all the energy fields that we inhabit. That is to say, God is a creative energy that supersedes anything traditional religions thought has attributed to God, and this energy operates within the evolutionary process. Now, there's no one source that can provide a complete description of reality, because reality is open-ended. Spiritual teaching, then, is about opening up new horizons of possibility rather than being found locked in dogmas and creeds and religions. I don't think there is one religion, not even all the religions together, that can contain or explain sacred mystery. I do believe that we humans need authentic ritual and teaching in which to explore how we relate to each other, that is, how we love our neighbor, and how we take care of creation. Now, though facts and information are critically important, we ultimately access meaning through story, through myth. Sacred texts of various religions grow out of specific cultural periods. And for those of us in the Judeo-Christian tradition, this means that we learn to see the Bible as safeguarding the story and as documents that need to be reinterpreted afresh in each new age if the story is to maintain its power to challenge us, to change us, and to inspire us. Perhaps one of the greatest or most important insights at this point is that we humans are not the primary narrator of the sacred story. Creation is. We are called into learning how to be what Ormutu calls supreme listeners. And I think he has it right when he says that from a quantum theological point of view, contemplation becomes the landmark of theology, spiritual practice. The pursuit of justice becomes its dominant practice. Spiritual practice and justice. All the rest, he says, is window dressing, useful but not essential. Is all this clear? No? I'll say it all again sometime. Now, this is important because this is the framework out of which we come and toward which we head. We bring into being, by what we apprehend, new understandings of what is real. So the only way we can escape from the grips of these shadow aspects that I mentioned last week is to step away from them. Now, being here is one way you're doing that. Because in these times together, I'm going to continue to remind you that being human is not a static process. That's what we were taught was true, but it isn't. We are ourselves in an evolutionary process. And evolution means that change is constant. Evolution means that change is normative, that it has consequences, and none of us likes change. But we're in it. This means, among other things, that we have to be involved in the process of paying attention and re-examining the spiritual foundations of our daily existence. In order to live meaningful lives, we have to have meaningful spirituality. And one of the things I mean by meaningful spirituality is one that is honest, that is in keeping with the insights that are coming to us from all aspects of the evolutionary sciences, from physics, all of that. We have to be open to the implications it has for us. So just to kind of summarize, on the no longer, we're going between the no longer and the not yet, on the no longer side is an understanding of faith as a set of defined beliefs that are passed on from one generation to another and that are lived out primarily in the context of the church. That's the no longer. This is what is coming to an end. And it scares institutional people witless. Okay? But it is what's coming. On the not yet side is an understanding of faith as something that we appropriate and understand in accordance to the various stages that we move through in life, and that our primary purpose is to take responsibility, personal responsibility, for continuing to grow as we move toward the end of our journey on this planet, which is what's in store for all of us. Have a nice day. But really, this is what gives life meaning. Growth is a developmental process happening throughout our entire life. Now, the implication for this is that faith belongs to the adult. I think we have an importance to give children grounding, but it's not confined to the younger years. It especially means that faith is not simply an inherited set of religious beliefs. In my work as a counselor and director, I've come to believe that when this faith development is neglected, humans will seek out compensatory satisfactions. And these can easily become addictive behaviors. Sometimes the culture feeds these addictions, like excessive screen time, Facebook, other things. And sometimes religious ideologies feed these addictions. One of these is the fundamentalist commitment to power and control. And you see that in ISIS, suicide bombers, various hate groups, righteousness. One of the things younger people in our day need are useful role models of mature spiritual faith. And one of the most hopeful things about our time is that we're getting older. Our population is getting older, right? And our commitment as growing older people is to stay young at heart. That's why I think we have a moral obligation to be happy. But so I see some questions growing out of this, and this is kind of the roadmap toward the land of the not yet. How do we encounter and respond to God? Not in some distant, far-off sky space, but right here, right now. What are the prophetic positions that we need to take in our culture to create a different one? And how do we translate Jesus' vision for a new world into structures that make for justice and freedom for the millions of people who are condemned to poverty and oppression? How can we cultivate a religion that transcends patriarchal power? How do we promote a spiritual practice that truly recognizes and promotes the inherent dignity of every person? And how can we bring a faith that reflects the love of God to bear on the violent aspects of our culture? Those are some of the questions that I'm toying with. So in 2013, the Center for Action and Contemplation, that's Richard Rohr's organization, opened its door to a new educational program they call the Living School. And Sherry and I were there for the initiation of that program, and at that time, Rohr published 8 core principles that he said would guide the Living School. And the third core principle that he had was the criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. Oppositional energy only creates more of the same. I believe this is true. I don't want to fight. I don't want to criticize. But I do want to expose fundamentalism as the danger that it is. What I am attempting to do is like put the label poison on a bottle so that nobody will drink from it. And we live in a culture that is growing in its fundamental tendencies. Now, I don't expect you to remember this, but when I began this theme, I cited for you in the giving the history of modern fundamentalism, modern Christian fundamentalism, which goes back to the beginning of about the 19th century. Fundamentalism has been part of religion from the beginning. But what I'm calling Christian fundamentalism, they have 5 fundamentals in fundamentalism. And they are, the Bible is the literal, inerrant Word of God. Jesus was literally born of a virgin. Substitutionary atonement is the meaning of Jesus' death on the cross. The word atonement comes from putting the word at one together, at one minute, to make one. The miracles in the New Testament are real. They literally happened. Jesus rose physically from the grave, ascended literally into the sky, and will return someday in the second coming. Some of you have read John Shelby Spong's book, Unbelievable, and Spong is the one who said that if Jesus rose from the earth and ascended into heaven at the speed of light, he would still be in our galaxy. So I'm going to begin working my way through these, exposing them as the distortions that they are, and in the process, I hope to be offering what Rohr talks about as the practice the better. Now, I got to tell you right up front, I have been hesitant to take this up, this first one especially, because I don't want to turn any of you off. I don't want to turn any of you away. And I am making some assumptions that may not be true, they may, but I doubt very seriously if many of you have much practical concern about the Bible. I doubt that there is a whole host of people in this room that read the Bible every day. Maybe you do. I know there are some of you who have ideas and beliefs about the Bible that are precious to you. You probably got those in your childhood, and they may be beliefs that you have not examined for decades. I have found that there are people who are very touchy about the Bible, even if they don't read it, even if they don't know anything about it, about how it came to us, or anything they still are doing. Don't touch the book. And there are likely people in this class who think, I've moved past this. The Bible is a dusty old tome that has little relevance for me. I have no interest in it. So wherever you are on the spectrum, I just ask your indulgence. Okay? It's not my intention to offend anybody. It's not my intention to bore anyone, but I do think this is essential information for us. For one thing, the Bible is the foundational identity document for the Jewish Christian tradition. And for another, fundamentalists are most influential in making American public policy right now, and for deciding how things are structured in evangelical churches in America. In trying to squelch criticism of the policy that leads to the separation of children from their parents of those considered illegal immigrants, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who is a Methodist, cited a passage from Romans 10, and said, "You citizens ought not to complain about this because God has ordained civil authority and you are to obey them." Romans 10, look it up. Now, we won't go into the wrongness of this. It's wrong on so many levels, but we won't do that here. Some other time. So in order to be spiritually and religiously literate, we got to know these fundamentals and what other well-informed beliefs might work better in experiencing and creating peace, love, joy, and patience. So this is what I want to suggest. Think of this as eating your spiritual Brussels sprouts. It's good for you. How many of you hate Brussels sprouts? I could have picked something else. I love Brussels sprouts. All right, let's start here. To be a Christian is, no matter what variety of Christian you are, to be a Christian is to have some connection with the Bible. Being Christian, again, no matter what variety, is to be connected to the God of Jesus. But that is not possible without some connection to the Bible. The Bible is where we get our information about Jesus. Now, there are, of course, many other valid ways to be connected to the sacred. You don't have to be Christian to do that. But if you're in that tradition, you need to know something about the Bible. Now, views about Jesus and about the Bible have led some people to think of Christianity as an exclusive religion. And it's not a matter of exclusion or being better than, it's just a matter of identity. Now, remember what I said earlier about the source of the importance of story and myth. The Bible is the source of the story that we tell. And so it's important to know how the Bible came to be, what's in it, how to read it, how to interpret it, and a host of other matters. I think people leave the church today for a wide variety of reasons, but one of the main ones is about the Bible. Biblical literalism, which I will show as the worst way to approach the Bible, with its emphasis on biblical infallibility, historical factuality, moral and doctrinal absolutes, probably turns more people off on Christianity being a doorway to access the sacred than any other single thing. All that the Christians themselves. Well, it was Gandhi who said, "I love your Jesus, I do not like your Christians." So there are people out there, some of them with graduate degrees, who still believe the earth was created in 6 days, that Adam and Eve were real people, that there was a flood that destroyed all life on the planet except for Noah and his family, that God ordered the wholesale slaughter of the Amalekites, that God cares or ever cared whether you were clothes woven of two kinds of cloth, that God upholds the subordination of women, that's Southern Baptists and others, that Jesus is the only way of salvation, that there will be an event called the second coming of Christ that will involve the destruction of most of the human race, and that it is a sin to be a homosexual. Marcus Borg has a very useful way of presenting an approach to understanding the Bible. He calls it the historical, metaphorical, sacramental way of approaching the Bible. We're going to look at historical today. Historical, metaphorical, sacramental way of approaching the Bible. I believe that the more we understand how things came to be as they are, the more we'll have a renewed understanding of what's true for us, and the more vital and vitalizing our own spirituality will be. So, forgive me for continuing to bring this up, but one of the things that keeps the shadow aspects I mentioned last week in place is fear. Frightened people do frightening things. And one of the manifestations of fear, which leads to the desire for control, is fundamentalism. And one of the ways to understand fundamentalism, whether it's religious fundamentalism or political fundamentalism, is that it is built on the assumption that I have the truth. I have the truth. Religious fundamentalism claims that the truth of God has been captured for all time, and that it shows up in inerrant Scripture. That is to say, fundamentalists believe that the truth of God has been captured in the Bible. Now, the reason it's important for us to know about this is that any religious system that believes it speaks with the voice of God inevitably turns demonic and violent. Fundamentalism has supported slavery, it has condemned homosexuals, and it has killed those deemed to be God's enemies. Now, fundamentalism is not only alive and well, it's growing in our world. And so we're beginning to look today at the Christian fundamentalists' claim that the Bible is literally true. It isn't. But to say that and leave it there doesn't say what the Bible is. And it's important to know this. So the writings of the Bible can be looked at as a human response that people have made to their experience of God. And the people I have in mind here are the ancient Jewish people and their history, and then the early Christian movement. So as such, the Bible is a human product. God did not write the Bible. Now, that being the case, that it's a human product, means that not only does it not contain the absolute truth, but the Bible is a relative and culturally conditioned document. We'll spend the rest of our time today talking about this. Now, to say that the Bible is relative, what I mean by that is that the words in the Bible are related to their time and their space, not to ours. The book of Revelation was not written for people in the 20th century or the 21st century about when Jesus is coming back. But it gets interpreted that way. And just as we can get captured by the forces in our culture, like patriarchy and a variety of other things, unseen forces, so could the writers of Scripture. They were no different from us. They also got captured by what their culture was about. So we see things a certain way, they saw things a certain way. So the Bible uses language, symbols, concepts of the culture in which the stories were told. When the ancient Israelites, and I thought about this, I wrote this days ago, but I thought about it when we were singing a hymn in church today that had the phrase in it, washed in the blood of the Lamb. When the ancient Israelites wrote that phrase, came up with that ritualistic phrase, they did so out of a cultural experience that not a person in this room can identify. We just sort of borrow it and think we know what it means. If you really think about it, it's fairly repugnant. The Nicene Creed, which I mentioned earlier, not only uses language of the 4th century Greek philosophy, but it was written at a time when the world was considered flat and the center of the known universe. Everything revolved around the earth. So the Bible tells us how people saw things, not how God sees things. Right? Now, all of this that I've just said seems so true to me and so apparent that to me, I'm so naive, I think. At least two things ought to result from this. First, people ought not be put off or skeptical about the legitimate value and use of the Bible. That's the first thing. It's a valid document for identity. We should be relieved and open to knowing more about it. And second, no one would doggedly hold to the notion that the Bible is literally true. But in spite of all those facts that are so apparent to me, there are a whole world of people out there who don't hold it that way. The Bible is a historical product, and the history goes something like this. It's an obvious fact, but it's not so obvious to many people. The majority of what we have in the Bible was not actually written until years and years and years and years and years after it was spoken. The parts that are written by Paul, whoever is a substitute for Paul, by whoever put together the gospel narratives that we have, and we now know that there were many gospel narratives that didn't make it into the New Testament. Those manuscripts were handwritten. They were redacted, that means edited, sometimes because the human writer made a mistake, sometimes because the church authorities dictated a change should be made in the text. Much of what's in the Hebrew Scripture did not start out as written stories. They were told by ancient people who lived in the Mesopotamian Valley. We, all of us humans, started our journey in Africa some 200,000 years ago. We lived in groups off the land. We were mostly what are referred to today as hunters and gatherers. And what religion existed was largely matriarchal. It was feminine. One of the earliest sculptured depictions of God is a woman on a birthing bench. By the way, there were several people here and elsewhere who sent me the story this week of the team of psychologists at the University of North Carolina. You've seen that poll, who were asked if God had a face, what would the face of God look like? And the answer to most Christians is that God, you will be relieved, God looks like a young white male. Even women gave that answer. That's how strong the patriarchy is. God has a young white male face. Conservatives are more likely to see God as a white, powerful figure, and liberals see God as younger and loving. The tendency is to shape God to fit our needs. We put Jesus into our story. Our task is to put ourselves into Jesus' story. Somewhere around 8000 BC, people who migrated to the Mesopotamian Valley began to organize into communities, and that's when they began to make laws. And it was a long process, but one of the changes that occurred in that transition was that God came to be more patriarchal and external. So during this long journey, 6,000 years or so, people began telling stories. And the stories, some of them ended up in the Bible. For example, there's the story of Cain and Abel. You know how long Cain hated Abel? As long as he was able. So Cain killed his brother, who made one kind of offering, and Cain killed his brother, and his punishment was he had to toil in the fields. This story is a parable about the conflict between the hunters and gatherers and the people who decided to organize and farm. Their conflict. And the Jews who interpreted the story, they told the story for a purpose. The story was, if you kill someone, you are killing your brother or your sister. Another example of a story that grew from this period is the story of the flood. The Mesopotamian Valley flooded regularly, and those who had turned to settled communities so that they can farm, they picked the most fertile lands, and it was those lands that would be flooded again and again. And that's why floods from God appear in so many of the different religions of the day. Not just Judaism, but in a lot of the religions that grew up around that time. None of the stories that we have in the Hebrew Scriptures were written when they happened. They were written, passed on word of mouth from one generation to another, and they were told to answer questions people had about being human. Why do women have pain when they give birth? Why are we punished when we do something bad? Why do people die? in a world where the lifespan was at most, maybe the average lifespan, 40 years, it was an honor to live a long time. That's why Adam is said to have lived to be 930 years old, which is an amazing thing because there was never an Adam to begin with. But these stories were never intended to be factual. Factuality was not a word those people understood. I got words from Jesus scholar Dominic Crossan that I love. It's not that those ancient people told literal stories and we are now smart enough to take them symbolically, but they told them symbolically and we are now dumb enough to take them literally. And that is seen in the fact that there are still people out there who are looking for Noah's Ark. Or denying that dinosaurs actually existed. We have to stop listening to fundamentalists. Just because they shout doesn't make it true. Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate, has written, "Someday, when grown-ups are back in charge, they'll have quite a mess to clean up." So the not yet territory toward which we journey is one where a mature faith practiced by mature adults is needed. I'll repeat what Amici says. We're called into learning how to be supreme listeners. We are called, at least in the tradition in which I stand, to listen to the more wonderful stories of the very human Jesus, who fought for the rights of the poor, who stood up to authorities, who loved people of all persuasions, who lived as a caring mystic, who truly believed he was a child of God, and so was everybody else. We are not only to listen to that story, we are to live it. And come to think of it, that may be like eating Brussels sprouts too. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo. So happy Father's Day, and I will see you here next week. Thank you.